Ukraine discovered what Russia hoped would remain concealed just before dawn, an underground ammunition stronghold so secret that not even Russian forces were aware of its existence. It wasn't just an attack that came next. In a matter of minutes, an entire military base was engulfed in flames due to a precision hit. Tonight, we'll examine how Ukraine discovered it, how they struck it, and why this single action could have a greater impact on the outcome of the conflict than any missile strike to date. Ukraine initiated one of the most audacious and daring intelligence operations of the war just before dawn, when the battlefield is at its quietest and even drones struggle to detect movement. The kind of task where timing, instinct, and a little bit of luck are just as important as talent. For weeks, Russia thought it would be difficult to complete the mission, which was conducted in complete darkness, because both armies typically slow down at this hour between the last breath of night and the first glimmer of morning. While soldiers take a break, drones return to the base to refuel, and radar operators combat fatigue. When Ukraine attacked, it was the one instance when war seemed to hold its breath. 4:13 a.m. An odd event occurred. Unprecedented radio talk was caught by Ukrainian reconnaissance teams listening to encrypted Russian frequencies. It had an urgent tone. Short and abnormally tense, the communications were coded exactly the type of messaging that occurs when something crucial goes wrong or when something really sensitive is being transferred. It was not the content, however, that surprised observers. It was the place. The signal was not coming from a known ammunition location, a command post, a checkpoint, or any known Russian facility. It came from deep within a densely wooded area, which Russia had never recognized or charted as military territory. Ukrainian intelligence recognized the implications of this within minutes. The signal was too complicated to be a standard supply truck, too powerful to be portable, and too protected to be haphazard. There was only one possible explanation. Ukraine had discovered a massive, secret Russian armaments store that Moscow thought was undetectable. The kind of depot that Russia uses to support full offensives is the kind that doesn't appear on satellites. It is constructed beneath camouflage nets, encircled by decoy cars, shielded by anti-drone jammers, and hidden beneath layers of military secrecy. Their war efforts' lifelines are found inside these covert compounds. Drone stockpiles ready for deployment, glide bomb components used to pound Ukrainian cities, artillery shells for frontline bombardments, fuel barrels for tanks, armored carriers and missile launchers, spare parts, electronics, and explosives. This was more than a simple logistical issue. The purpose of this nerve hub was to maintain secrecy at all costs, and Ukraine had stumbled upon it, but nothing that came after was a coincidence. Analysts, drone operators, and field commanders were rushing within an hour. There were no notifications or public alarms. Since there was less and less time to act, every action was carried out in quiet. Before Ukrainian forces could attack, Russia would move trucks, disperse ammo, turn off generators, evacuate crew, and conceal everything if they discovered their secure store had been compromised. If this opportunity is lost, the depot might never come again. From this point on, the mission changed from a standard intelligence scan to a full-scale pre-dawn race to verify, reveal, and demolish one of Russia's most secretive military locations. Drones fitted with infrared cameras were released in the dark, flying low to evade radar before the sun rose. Commanders discussed strike routes, timing, and hazards. Special forces listening sites were brought online, and satellite feeds were redirected. It all hinged on remaining silent. It was all about remaining quick. Trucks parked under roofs that shielded them from the heat, rows of fuel containers, stacks of ammunition crates, and what appeared to be mobile launchers concealed behind tree lines were among the first shadows to appear in the streamed photographs. There was no room for doubt. Ukraine had discovered a covert Russian logistical center that could provide dozens of armored vehicles and thousands of soldiers. The whole morning was altered by the finding. What began as an odd radio transmission turned out to be the secret to revealing a significant Russian weakness, and the urgency increased with each second that went by. Russia was unaware that their most secure storage had been infiltrated, and Ukraine had only one chance to destroy it before morning arrived and drones became more manageable. What came next? One of the war's most dramatic events would be how Ukraine organized, carried out, and delivered the hit. In western Luhansk, Russian troops had been stealthily transporting equipment across the same winding forest line for months. From above, the region appeared entirely normal, a belt of thick trees, devoid of any structures, roads, or indications of military activity. Satellite images revealed an intact canopy with branches and shadows that completely concealed whatever was underneath. However, appearances were misleading. Russia had made significant investments to conceal this site. Manufactured of unique materials intended to absorb heat signatures, they created camouflage nets that matched in well with the forest roofing. They even manufactured false wooden structures to resemble barns or storage sheds. The entire location was designed to deceive analysts, drones, and satellites to Moscow. This depot was not merely concealed. It was a phantom facility that was impenetrable, silent, and invisible. However, Ukraine never bought into the idea that something was wrong with the perimeter patrols, the changes to the terrain, and the oddly low level of human activity in what should have been rural farmland. Little patterns started to appear gradually, patterns that would only be noticed by highly qualified intelligence officers. Drone footage showed trucks entering the jungle, but thermal imaging showed them vanishing as though the earth had engulfed them. Hours later, they would resurface from an entirely new perspective, spotless, deserted, and devoid of any purpose. In odd locations, where there had never been any houses, barns, or mechanical structures, heat fingerprints would flicker. These brief but regular lights resembled the momentary activation of engines or the testing of generators. And Russian soldiers started to block off specific roads. Just an unwritten stay-out zone with no checkpoints or explanations. During the conflict, Ukraine witnessed enough suspicious activity to recognize when something wasn't right. Therefore, everything came together when Ukrainian intelligence picked up the weird, hurried broadcasts from that same forest at 4 a.m., which were coded radio talk. This was a hint, not a coincidence, and Ukraine followed it. Ukraine launched its fleet of night vision drones, not just any drones, within 40 minutes. These were altered to fly incredibly low, sneaking under Russian jamming devices and hugging the tree line to evade radar. To see through the hazy pre-dawn mist, their cameras were upgraded. Even the most seasoned operators were taken aback by what transpired next. A form appeared through the dense fog and almost complete darkness. One, then another, and finally an entire cluster. First, there appeared the silhouette of enormous, cylindrical gasoline tanks in rows, some of which were partially hidden by camouflage. Then came piles of wooden crates that were too big and homogeneous to be anything else than ammunition boxes. Last but not least, thermal cameras show cars sitting quietly with their headlights off and engines blazing dimly. There was no emptiness in the forest. It concealed a whole operational logistics center, a tiny metropolis of supplies of ammunition, gasoline, and equipment. The doubts held by Ukraine were dispelled. They provided concrete evidence. This was no ordinary storage location. In Russia's supply chain, this was a vital conduit. According to drone analysis and intercepted communications, it contained more than 1,700 tons of artillery shells, pallets of mortar rounds, glide bomb components, drone assembly kits and batteries, and crates labeled with electronic guidance systems, enough fuel to sustain 2 full Russian brigades for several weeks. There was more than 1 unit or operation supported by this base. It was driving Russia's whole offensive in the region. Ukraine wouldn't merely destroy ammunition if they could eradicate it. Units would have to ration munitions, halt their attacks, and possibly retire in some places as a result of choking the Russian advance. There was a huge potential impact. The challenging aspect, though, was how to hit it. The stockpile was located far behind Russian defenses. It was shielded by several layers of personnel, camouflage, and anti-drone jammers. They would be alerted by a loud attack. An ill-timed one would be caught. Ukraine had located the target, but one of the most difficult tasks of the conflict would be to hit it and hit it right. Dawn was drawing near, time was running out, and Ukraine needed to take advantage of every moment. Russia was oblivious. Every command center was filled with the question, how do we destroy a secret base Russia believes cannot be found? Due to the fact that this stockpile was hidden well behind Russian lines, far from the front, out of range of Ukrainian fire and shielded by jammer layers. Ukraine couldn't just go for a traditional attack. A drone attack on a single fuel truck wouldn't be like this. The core of Russia's supply chain was targeted by this attack. It required stealth, accuracy, and, most importantly, success on the first try. An unsuccessful strike would be more than just a lost chance. It would notify Russia to move the facility, increase security, and possibly even carry out counterattacks. No second chance was available. By 5:12 a.m., just before dawn, Ukrainian leadership had put together a specialist strike group that complemented the strengths of each weapon. Long-range strike drones that had been altered to fly quietly, slowly, and low. High-precision GPS coordinates were used to program HIMARS rockets. Laser-accurate positions are relayed by special forces spotters who are literally concealed within the treeing. This asset mix was not haphazard. It was an attack machine that was synchronized. In her later analysis of the operation, Rachel Maddow called it a masterclass in coordination of nighttime combat at a level rarely seen in this fight. Then the mission's most audacious choice was made. Instead of attacking the vehicles, ammunition crates, or command tent, Ukrainian leaders decided to attack the fuel tanks first. The fuel. Why? Fuel burns hotter and faster than explosives. So if those tanks blew up all at once, the firestorm that would result would set off all of the neighboring explosives, starting a chain reaction that would be strong enough to destroy the entire depot in a single, ongoing eruption. Thousands of tons of ammo, hundreds of Russian trucks, and the fuel reserves of a whole region may all be destroyed in a single strike. However, a bold approach always entails a bold risk, and this one carried a significant one. The area's Russian air defense systems were alert. Radar operators regularly search the skies during these pre-dawn hours, recognizing that Ukraine typically prefers to strike when visibility is low. Anti-drone units with EW electronic warfare capability were always on readiness. Drones may be shot down, jammed, or diverted away from the depot if they were discovered early. The entire operation may be ruined by a single radar blip. Therefore, Ukraine took a risky but wise action. For a long time, they waited. All of the drones were locked into a silent hover position. Just outside the Russian radar sweep, engines hum softly. They waited for Russia to be the least vigilant, for operators to rotate shifts, for exhaustion to set in, and for the nighttime to be at its darkest. This was not just a physical attack, but also a psychological one. The order finally arrived at 5:27 a.m., when the sky was still a perfect blanket of black and the first sign of light was still minutes away. It was neither a second too early nor too late. One by one, Ukrainian communications start to descend. As they descended in height, the long-range drones slanted forward, their motors humming almost quietly. Like ghosts, they swooped between branches and dipped into pockets of fog, their shadows reaching the tops of the trees. The target alignment was verified by the Special Forces spotters, who were concealed by multi-layer ghillie suits and remained still for hours. The corrected coordinates were sent to the higher teams. At this point, the entire operation was precariously close. Fuel tanks arranged like dominoes, piles of explosive packages, cars with crews sleeping inside, and ignorant Russian guards were all visible through the cameras of the drones as they moved in on the secret base. Death was just a few seconds away. The sky remained pitch black. The Russians didn't know. The attack was only a few seconds away, and the drones were locked on. Like a shadow on a mission, the first drone, a long-range Ukrainian strike UAV, sailed over the night sky. Russian infrared scanners could hardly detect it due to its modified low-heat engine output. In order to evade radar beams, its altitude was precisely calibrated. Every action was silent, methodical, and bordering on predatory. It moved through the narrow spaces between jamming signals, slipping undetected via Russian radar monitoring. Not a single alarm went off. No Russian soldier raised his head. The operators in Ukraine leaned forward, holding their breath as it arrived at the location. The group of big silver gasoline tanks, each holding thousands of liters of aviation and diesel fuel, were immediately in the line of sight of the drone's aiming reticle. The UAV then dropped its payload with mathematical accuracy. There was nothing for a breathless moment. There was a moment of complete quiet, a lull before a storm that nobody on the ground anticipated. Then, with the ferocity of a volcano eruption, a huge ball of fire exploded skyward, quickly turning the dark woodland into dazzling daylight. It lit up the trees, ignited branches, and sent a column of flames hundreds of feet high as the explosion spread outward in all directions. Like a physical force, the shock wave swept across the landscape, blowing up doors, throwing soldiers off their feet, and shaking buildings kilometers distant. When they witnessed the flash, civilians in far-off places assumed it was an air raid. Later, soldiers from both sides would use the same memorable description of the event: a sunrise made of fire. However, the actual destruction was just getting started. The superheated fuel tanks, which were immediately melted by the drone strike, produced a blast wave that struck the nearby munitions containers. In quick succession, those containers exploded like a line of falling dominoes. One explosion led to another. Shrapnel was thrown in all directions when artillery munitions cooked off. Mortar shells exploded. Like lethal fireworks, rockets erupted and flew toward the flaming forest. Tightly packed ammunition trucks turned into rolling balls of fire, their metal frames bending in the heat and their tires melting. One after another, fuel tanks exploded, setting off a series of explosions so powerful that the heat spike caused false signals to be detected by Russian air defense operators miles away. In a matter of minutes, Russian logistics completely collapsed, turning the entire depot into a rolling fire. Additionally, Ukraine wasn't completed on time. A concerted barrage was conducted by Ukrainian HIMARS teams, aiming at vehicles frantically attempting to escape, backup bunkers concealed beneath camouflage, and command tents. Guided rockets flashed across the early morning sky on the depot's far side. The rockets struck with ruthless precision. Trucks that were trying to flee caught fire, explosions caused hidden storage pits to collapse, volcanic rock-like flaming debris was launched into the air by secondary explosions. Ukrainian intelligence monitored Russian conversations descended into total panic as voices yelled over one another. The base has vanished. Everything is on fire. Our air defense is where? Why were they not visible to us? We've gone crazy. Everything. Can you hear me? Everything? Soldiers cried out for reinforcements, and commanders demanded reports. Nobody knew the answers. From a distance of 40 kilometers, the massive, bright, and dense fireball that emerged from the forest formed a towering black column of smoke. Like a storm cloud, it obscured portions of the sky. Although Russian troops hurried to the location, no base remained to be defended when they got there. No bunkers, no trucks, no ammunition stacks, and no fuel. Silence, scorched ground still blazing from the fire, and twisted steel ash. Automobiles melted into metal ammunition puddles. Bunkers were just holes with cracks in them. Charred skeletons of trees were left behind. It resembled a meteor impact zone more than a depot. The operation was completed by 6 a.m., the sun was rising, and the once secret Russian logistics hub, which Moscow had depended on and thought to be untouchable, was no longer there. Before breakfast, Ukraine not only revealed a secret depot, but completely destroyed it. This was more than just a spectacular explosion. It wasn't only a magnificent strike captured on drone footage or a fireball lighting up the pre-dawn sky. Because what Ukraine destroyed was more than just a gasoline cluster or an ammo dump. This was something much larger, a strategic earthquake inside the battle, a moment that sent shockwaves across command centers in both Kyiv and Moscow. They destroyed a vital component of Russia's military apparatus, and this is the main reason it counts. 1. Russia lost vital ammunition that is difficult to replenish. The ammunition in the storage included guided components smuggled through back channels to get over sanctions, artillery shells, and high-grade explosives, the kinds of weapons Russia goes to great efforts to preserve. These were not ordinary mortar rounds or shells. They provided Russia with the munitions it needed to continue its offensives. It was thought that some of these weapons had just been brought in by secret supply routes, routed through friendly countries, disguising themselves as civilian cargo and being carried into the forest at night. In 90 seconds, all that effort was gone. According to later estimates by military analysts, the restrictions caused Russia's logistics to lag by weeks or even months. These particular weapons could not be instantly replaced by factories that were already operating at maximum capacity. Russia was forced to use outdated, unreliable supplies. This was a terrible setback in a conflict when the speed of combat is determined by artillery. Immediately, 2 Ukrainian forces experienced decreased artillery pressure. Frontline Ukrainian units in eastern Luhansk and Donetsk saw something exceptional within hours of the strike. Russian bombardment dropped noticeably and quantifiably. Unexpectedly, there were lengthy pauses and fire gaps that hadn't been observed in months, where Ukrainian troops were accustomed to withstanding continuous bombardment. Normally, firing barrage after barrage, Russian forces suddenly slowed down and rationed ammunition as if it were precious. This is exactly how one Ukrainian commander stated it. Someone seems to have turned down the war's volume. Because of this change, Ukrainian soldiers had greater latitude to move forward, change positions, and resupply without having to worry about oncoming fire. The explosion meant survival for the soldiers on the ground. 3 of Russia's covert, undetectable depot strategies were revealed. It is impossible to exaggerate the psychological effects of this strike. This stockpile was thought to be undetectable by Russia. To conceal their movements from satellites, they employed sophisticated camouflage netting, heat-dampening roofing, decoy constructions, and cautious routing. It was an ideal ghost facility on paper. Ukraine found, examined, and destroyed the depot, shattering that delusion. Ukraine demonstrated that Russia's concealment has limits, regardless of how carefully it conceals its assets. Every subterranean bunker, woodland depot, and secret storehouse is now a possible target. Russian strategy is altered as a result. They are forced to devote resources to protect what was once thought to be safe, relocate more frequently, and spread their supplies thinner. Uncertainty is fatal in battle, and Russia currently has a lot of it. On both sides, force morale drastically changed. Videos of Ukrainian soldiers applauding while watching far-off fires on the horizon went viral. The men were worn out from regular attacks. It was a confidence and energy boost to see a Russian stockpile, especially a large one, destroyed. However, the atmosphere on the Russian side disintegrated. The same narrative of anger, bewilderment, and blame was revealed by intercepted communications and released letters from Russian soldiers. For keeping thousands of tons of explosives in one location, many accused their personnel of being incompetent. Others bemoaned the failure of air defenses or the ignorance of Ukraine's capacity to strike so far behind the lines. The already low morale of Russian troops, 5, was further undermined by this internal blame game. Ukraine's growing intelligence capabilities were demonstrated by the operation. This hit was no accident. It wasn't a coincidence. Radio interception, pattern analysis, drone reconnaissance, special forces coordination, and precision-guided artillery were all carried out in almost perfect synchronization in this example of layered intelligence. In a single remark that has resonated throughout newsrooms and military analysis circles, Rachel Maddow summed it up. Ukraine did more than simply demolish a depot. Russia's faith in its own secrecy was shattered. And that alters everything because Russia is suddenly aware of something uncomfortable for the first time. What else may Ukraine be able to locate if they could locate this depot? What could happen next? Please hit like if you liked this breakdown and want to receive the most recent frontline updates. The channel benefits greatly from it.